Here, so the last thing that we got to yesterday was ukshatim la'oit al yadecha, right? That you should sign them, you should tie them as a sign upon your eyes. Va'ula totafot beinenecha, they should be as frontlets between your eyes, whatever frontlets might be, I don't know. Frontlets, yeah, it sounds like a treat you give to the kids or something, right? But
Is that what totafot means?
Totafot really doesn't have very much of a translation to it. I don't know.
I thought it was just a rabbi's name.
Here they just say that, and you
It's the same.
sign upon your arm and let them be tefillin. First of all, the interesting halacha over here. If you were to read over here that they're supposed to be, there's supposed to be frontlets between your eyes, so that you would imagine that the most obvious place to be wearing your tefillin is here, in between your eyes, right? We have what's called halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which is that halacha was given to Moshe on Har Sinai, that the tefillin sit up here on the top of the head in a straight line with the nose, right? And they really have to be exactly in the right place over there, and that's how you fulfill. It's everybody's minhag. We're very inclusive. But the idea is, of course, you don't see this in the words itself. So the people throughout throughout history that have been following the written Torah and not the oral Torah would place their tefillin in between their eyes over here. And again, I'm not quite sure how they do it because it must be a little bit difficult, a little bit uncomfortable for sure. But nevertheless, that's what they would do because that's what the words seem to imply.
Who would do that?
Who?
Sorry?
Who?
People that only keep, throughout history, there have been groups of people that have only kept the written Torah, not the oral Torah as well. So, for example, you mentioned the Karaites, that's the latest, they've been around for a little while. The Karaites only follow the oral law. They only follow the written law. And over here in the written law, it says, right, that there should be totafot beinenecha, that it should be between your eyes. And that's what they do. They place their tefillin between their eyes. Of course, there's a built-in paradox over here, which is that everybody here, I hope, knows that to understand the written Torah is impossible without the oral Torah. The written Torah is like your skeleton, and the oral Torah is like the flesh that goes around it and turns it into something which is viable. But there is no indication inside of the written Torah whatsoever as to what tefillin are supposed to look like. Which means that even people following the oral tradition, and they all wear the same kind of tefillin, they wear black tefillin, black boxes that are attached to black straps, all of that is an oral tradition. It's kind of, I guess it's kind of cute actually, that, in order to be able to fulfill what the written dictate of the Torah tells you to do, you've got to rely on the oral tradition anyway, which means that it's impossible to understand the written Torah without the oral Torah. It's just
like the same thing as slaughtering animals and all that.
100%, right? The Torah says you need to eat kosher meat. The Torah doesn't tell you how to do that, right? The Torah says you need to get married or a person needs to get divorced, right? It doesn't tell you what's required in order to fulfill the dictates of the Torah. It just tells you that's what you need to do. Along comes the oral Torah and fills in all the gaps and lets us know what needs to be done. I remember reading that there are two Samaritan communities that keep the written Torah, not the oral Torah, and one of them is in what's it called? I think it's called Nablus. No, Har Grizim, and the other one. There's another one in Ashdod. Interestingly enough, I don't know how they ended up over there. Now I don't know if you know your geography. Nablus is up in the mountains and it's very cool. Ashdod is on the sea. And it's very humid over there, and they wanted to know. They wrote a letter to the high priest of their system, wanting to know if it was permissible for them to put on the air conditioning on Shabbat, because it says that you shouldn't kindle any fire in your home on Shabbos. The Karaites and Samaritans hold by that means that you shouldn't have any fire whatsoever in your home on Shabbos, which means they don't eat any hot food. It also means they can't heat up their home, and it means they don't use electricity, which is they can't cool their home down.
The Samaritans also go.
Yeah. So they sent off a letter asking whether it was permissible to put on the air conditioning on Shabbat, right? Because it gets rather warm over there in Ashdod. And they got a response back saying that it was, because that's not really kindling fire. That's not what the Torah is talking about. And again, I mean, they should be cool over Shabbat. I don't see why not. But it was interesting that even in order for them to be able to live, in today's communities, right? You still need some kind of an oral explanation to what's going on. Otherwise, things don't make very much sense. They just don't.
So wait, you are allowed to use air conditioning on Shabbos?
That's what they're saying. No, not us, them.
Okay.
Which means that in order to understand the written Torah, and only to use the written Torah, they're utilizing, like a response that's been written that's using logic to explain why it's okay to do.
We're allowed to use it. Like if you turn on the AC before Shabbos.
Yeah, you can set it all up, and you can have a time switch, put it on and switch it off for whenever you want. That's not a problem, but for them it is a problem, because for them you're not allowed to use any electricity because you're kindling fire. You're not allowed to have any fire kindled in your home on Shabbos. Right, regardless of when it was kindled. Interestingly enough, that's one of the reasons why we eat hot food on Shabbos morning.
To show that we're not Karaites?
Yeah, to show that we're not Karaites. Where does cholent come from?
Cholent.
where does cholent come from?
Eastern Europe, wasn't it?
It's
really
something which is much earlier than that. Rashi talks about the idea of cholent coming from perhaps a combination of two French words of chaud and long, which means hot and long, and it's something that's been sitting on the fire. And the idea of eating hot food on Shabbos is to show that we're not Karaites, right? To show that we're happy to utilize heat on Shabbos, just not to kindle it on Shabbos itself. That's the problem.
Where do Karaites, from what part of history do we find their origin? How did that?
I'd say probably going back about maybe 1,000 years ago. Maybe a little bit more than that. I can't remember exactly. When they came into being. Yeah. Towards the beginning of the early what are called the Rishonim, the era of the Rishonim, towards the beginning of that.
You still have some today, right?
Yeah. Again, the idea of keeping the Torah by only using the written Torah is, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. Again, totafot beinenecha, what on earth does that mean? An ot al yadecha, what does that mean? That it should be a sign upon your arm? What does that mean? To what? I don't know, to put a tattoo on there, to have some kind of a sticker or something. I don't know. But where do we come to the knowledge that these things are tefillin? That is only through the oral tradition. It's not through any other way. You can't perform the mitzvah of tefillin without that. Yeah.
Was tefillin passed down from generation to generation?
Yeah.
That's how we know?
Yeah.
Just like the God concept? Or?
Well, it says like this. The Gemara says that all of the halachas of tefillin were given to Moshe on Sinai by God. Right, which means that from then onwards, we've had that's where the tradition of what tefillin look like and how they're supposed to be worn. That's where it comes from.
So we can assume that Moses wore tefillin?
Yeah.
All day,
Yeah.
every day.
Really?
Not on Shabbat, presumably, right? But
Unless you put them on right before Shabbos.
Nighttime.
at night time, maybe took them off for night time. We don't wear our tefillin at night time. The reason we don't wear our tefillin at night, they wear it all day. I mean, until today, there are certain people who are, very, very, very spiritual who wear their tefillin all day long.
Was Rav Scheinberg, he wore the talis with the tefillin all day?
He wears tzitzis all day
There's a
long.
guy in Jerusalem that does it. I think he's like some big
Yeah.
Gedolim, and he lives in the old city, and he has it. Whenever he walks through the roba, he wears his talis over his eyes, and he has this tefillin.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something which is you won't see it very often, right? But it's definitely something which you'll see from time to time if you're looking out for it. It's very hard because what's the problem? The problem with wearing tefillin is that you've got to be focused on your tefillin the whole time. You've got to know that you're wearing them. So wearing tefillin when you're involved in spiritual pursuits, so maybe that's a little bit easier, right? But you can imagine that if you're wearing your tefillin, all of a sudden your mind drifts off to the ball game or to what's going to be for lunch or something like that, then it becomes a problem. It's supposed to be. That's why we wear our tefillin more. Most people wear the tefillin at shacharis, because that's the longest tefillah that we've got, the longest prayer service that we've got, and that allows us the most amount of time to wear our tefillin and hopefully be focused on what we're doing.
Why do we have to, some people have Rabbeinu Tam?
The machloikis in the halacha between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, which the truth of the matter is it's a machloikis, it's a disagreement which is much earlier than that, about what order the pashas are supposed to be in, which means that everybody agrees which 4 paragraphs of the Torah need to be written into the tefillin. The question is, which order do they go in? And Rashi was of the opinion that the order that he follows, that's the only order that you can fulfill the mitzvah with. And Rabbeinu Tam, who interestingly enough was Rashi's grandson, is of the opinion that his order is the only way you can fulfill the mitzvah. The Shulchan Aruch rules that somebody who is a Yerei Shamayim, somebody who has, fear of heaven, should wear both. That's why you'll see sometimes in the Hasidic communities there's a custom to take off your tefillin halfway through davening and put on another set of tefillin, even though they look exactly the same. Oh, hold on a second. Even though they're exactly the same, they are, in fact, those are Rashi tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam. Everyone agrees halachically that to fulfill the mitzvah of wearing tefillin, you have to wear Rashi tefillin. So that's the tefillin that you make your bracha over, or brachot, right? But to put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. However, by the Sfadim, there's a custom that the Shulchan Aruch says that if you're Yerei Shamayim, you should wear both of them. It doesn't say you should wear them one after the other. It just says wear them both. So amongst the Sfadim, there is a custom, not by all Sfadim, but by some, to wear 2 sets of tefillin at the same time. And that's where the smaller tefillin come into being, because you can't wear 2 regular-sized tefillin at the same time. You won't be able to wear them in the right place. So there is very special small tefillin that are made, which allow the tefillin to sit in the correct place over here. And you don't always see that the person's wearing them because they'll have the straps one on top of the other. They'll come around and it will look like just one set of straps over there. And the tefillin shorosh, very often what they do is that they cover, the first one gets covered with a kippah, and the second one is the one that's sitting out, the one that's noticeable, the one that you can see. So you may not even realize that they're wearing 2 sets of tefillin, but if you do, then that's why they're doing it.
It's crazy.
Yeah, of course.
My brother
Well,
was.
choose, right? Yeah?
Yeah, he wears them both. He's not Sephardi though, which is weird.
He wears them both at the same time?
No, but
Or one after the other?
Ashkenaz can wear both.
Yeah.
He wears them both at the same time? Yeah, that's
he-
interesting.
Yeah, he got
Okay.
he got a pair of the small ones as a gift, and so he started wearing
Yeah, very good. Okay, good for him. Yeah.
Why are they not worn? I think I have this right on Chol Moed. You don't wear them.
Yeah.
Pesach. Why?
Well, again, it's a machloikis. Everything's a machloikis, right? There's a disagreement amongst the authorities about whether you should wear your tefillin during the intermediate days of Pesach and Sukkot. What's called Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed is very difficult to define, right? It's partly weekday and it's partly festival day, and it's a little bit of a problem to work out what you're supposed to do. There are some communities that do wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed, specifically the Yekis wear them. The Yekis are the Jews that come from, have their origins from Germany. That's why, interestingly enough, when I was growing up in London, so most of the shuls followed the Yeki customs, and I would say about half the people in the shul on a Chol HaMoed wore their tefillin and half of them didn't. Most other shuls that you'll go to, if you go to a Yeki shul, everyone will be wearing their tefillin. If you go to a non-Yeki shul, no one will be wearing tefillin. If you pray in a shul where nobody wears tefillin, then you should not if your custom is to wear tefillin, you should not put them on in shul, but rather you should, after davening, go home and put them on in private, right, to fulfill the mitzvah. What is the inyan of not wearing tefillin during Chol HaMoed? The same way we don't wear tefillin on Yom Tov, we don't wear tefillin on Shabbat. It's considered to be an ot. So it says like this: a person that there are 3 otot, there are 3 signs that God has given us. One is a bris milah, one is Shabbos, and the other one is tefillin. But we only need 2 of them at the same time, right? Which means that bris milah is the circumcision is something that you carry around with you the whole time, which means that's a consistent ot that connects you to God all the time. When it's a weekday, we wear tefillin, and that gives us our second sign that we are connected to God. When it's Shabbat, we don't need tefillin because we've got the bris milah and Shabbat, and we've got the 2 together anyway. The tefillin on Chol HaMoed. Again, it's a machlokes about what exactly is the status of Chol HaMoed. I think pretty much because the standard thing, pretty much what you do is going to be okay or it's not going to be okay.
Yeki is those who wash before.
Yeah.
That,
That's
yeah,
them.
we're the ravens.
That's them.
They also wear talis before them, right?
That's right. That is them. I grew up amongst the Yekis. Okay. Anyway, so Vayir Totafot Beinenecha, and then it says Uchsavtem Amuzot Betecho Visharecha, and you need to write them on your doorposts and on your gates. What is that? That's the mitzvah of mezuzah. Right? What is the function of the mitzvah of mezuzah? It's something very simple. When you go in and out of doors, then you should be aware that God is going with you, entering with you, right? God is there the whole time. One of the inyanim, I saw a very interesting idea. One of the ideas of having mezuzot in your home is because your home is something which represents your domain. It's yours. You can do what you want over there, right? And the mezuzot are there on the doorpost just to remind us that the home needs to reflect the kedusha, the holiness of the fact that we're Jewish, right? Which means that we shouldn't forget. Otherwise, you know what? A person could have his home could have the wrong kind of a flavor to it. Rav Shamshon Rafal Hirsch says something very, very, very significant. He says we don't have very much influence over what's outside of the home, right? So in the streets, what can you do? The streets belong to everybody. So especially here in Yerushalayim, of course, we're very lucky to live in a city that is really imbued with holiness, and it's not very. You don't see billboards that are sort of like advertisements that are really completely inappropriate very often. But the minute you move out of a place like Yerushalayim and you start moving into different areas, you'll see all kinds of advertisements which are they're truly inappropriate. So it says Rav Hirsch that you don't have any control over the street. You can't control what's going on over there, but you can control what's going on in your home. And the first thing that you meet as you come back to your home is that mezuzah on the front door, and that's a way of just realigning yourself and remembering that I'm moving out of the culture of the community that I'm living inside of, and I'm moving into the culture of something which hopefully is a little holier, going to reflect that sense of holiness. I was once in a store in Mea Shearim many years ago, and an American couple came in. They wanted to buy a present for a friend of theirs. They wanted to buy a mezuzah. So they'd seen a mezuzah case in the window, which they thought was very nice, and they asked the fellow how much it is. He said it's $25. So they said, okay, we'll take it. And then the salesperson says, do you want the parchment as well? And there's like a moment of complete and absolute,
Well, what are you talking about?
What do you mean? They were completely nonplussed. They really were. And so he said, look, he took out a parchment. He showed them. Luke said, look, this is what goes inside what you've just bought. So they said, oh, okay, that's interesting. How much is that? So he said, well, they start at $20 and they move up to, if you want to get a beautiful one that's been written by, a famous scribe, they can go into hundreds of dollars, right? Mm-hmm. So they're making a calculation over here, $20 plus the $25 for the thing. That's more than we want to sell. You know what? We'll manage without it. It's okay. And at the time, I thought, really, I came out of there. I was pretty depressed, actually. It's like that's pretty upsetting, no? Because we all know that the outside is not what does it. It's the inside which does it, right?
Were you a rabbi at the time?
Huh?
Were you a rabbi at the time?
I certainly was.
So why didn't you tell them that the mitzvah is about what the parchment and not
Well, they
about
weren't
the
You didn't want to embarrass them.
I don't know. Don't
I'm just curious.
Don't give me a hard time.
Like that, like, can you?
I thought,
Are you
the
allowed
emphasis,
to
I
tell?
thought the person who was selling was gonna. He did a pretty good job of explaining, right? That what the reason behind having a mezuzah and what it does, and the what's called the bayit, the house that the mezuzah sits inside of. That's not what the mezuzah is. I thought he did a pretty good job.
Okay.
But
That'd be like for anybody,
whatever.
Like if you know the
They were
whole,
more
and you see
interested
somebody,
in the
can you
price.
tell them?
Yeah,
price was
yeah, for
important.
sure.
They might be making a mistake. They might be botching the whole mitzvah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
De-
but
de-
they
definitely.
were more interested in price.
No, it's interesting.
They've just been ignorant.
It took me it took me a few years. It took me a few years to realize that I think that it's not like they say in Yiddish, it's nicht gefrellich. It's not the end of the world what happened over there, which means it's true that the parchment is the thing that really, that's what the mitzvah is. But if you're buying a mezuzah for some kind of Jewish identification, right, which is obviously what they were doing. They were buying a mezuzah case for their friend because their friend, their friend has got just moved into a new house, whatever it is, and he should put a mezuzah up on the front door. So if the reason for doing it is Jewish identity, then you know what? It's certainly better than nothing, that's for sure. Are they fulfilling the mitzvah? No, they're not fulfilling the mitzvah. But you know what? It took me a few years to realize this, that it's definitely better than not having anything there at all, which presumably is what would have been if they hadn't have bought this for him.
Is it a halacha that you have to have it on every doorpost in the house, or only like the front door?
Yeah, the halacha is here, like it says over here. It says "Uchsavtam amuzuzot beitecha," that you should write them on the doorposts of your house. That it's talking about all the different doorposts of your house except for doors that go into the bathroom, or if you've got a door that's leading into a very small space, so maybe you've got like a closet or a little storage space somewhere. If it's less than 2 by 2 meters, what's called arba al arba amos, then it doesn't require a mezuzah.
Why not the bathroom?
Because the bathroom is where you do your dirty business and stuff. So
We say a blessing.
You don't say it
out
in the bathroom.
So the Indian is like this. It's interesting. No, so it's an interesting question in the halacha. If you've got a doorway that leads into let's say for example like over here, you've got a doorway that leads into where the sinks are, and then you've got doors that actually take you into the toilets themselves. So then. It's I mean, again, we don't put up mezuzahs over there anyway because you don't put up mezuzahs in places where nothing spiritual is taking place. So, for example, even though the bathrooms themselves are not directly when you go in, but you've got the whatchamacallit, you've got the sinks over there. The whole area over there is a place that you shouldn't be having Torah thoughts inside of until you get outside. And that's when you make the bracha, the blessing that should be said once you've come outside of the bathroom and not whilst you're in the bathroom.
Did it have anything to do with the pasuk that you're supposed to make a place outside the home to go to the bathroom, and so we consider the bathroom not even in the home? Like it's
I don't know.
Outside your camp, I think is how
it's possible. I don't know. It's possible. It is interesting. According to contemporary halachic authorities, the bathrooms of today are not the same as the bathrooms of once. Which in bathrooms of once were really rather dirty places, right? I mean, like you say, they were just holes that were dug into the ground, and there was a very limited way of being able to keep the place clean. And it was a place which, for sure, not only. I mean, you wouldn't even think about having Torah thoughts over there because it was a place that was pretty smelly, and that's why it was always set further away. Toilets of today are, Kanai Nahara, they're very clean places. Obviously, it depends a little bit on the person that's using it, but in general, the water, the way that everything is flushed away, nothing is left over there. It's not exactly the same as what it was. Again, we're careful because it's a place where that's where people go to the bathroom, and it's not always clean. So we're careful. We don't do anything spiritual whilst we're there. We just use it to go to the bathroom, and then we go outside to do our spiritual things, which is to make the blessing over it. But whatever. Anyway, so that's a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah of mezuzah. Good.
Quick question, Pastor. I do know some Jews that carry mezuzahs in their pockets. Is that?
Yeah, interesting. There's nothing inside of the halacha which says that you should do that. It is, according to some people, it's considered to be a segula. Right, a segula is like an omen, like a good omen. Like you're carrying something around with you. What's the pshat? It says like this, by the mezuzah, it says that the mezuzah, protects the home.
Yes.
Right? So a person carries around with them a mezuzah. I've seen people that have little mezuzahs that have been written that they wear them on a pendant, or they keep them on a keychain of some kind.
Different than the golden calf. It's uncommanded, yet it's creating an idol to try to bring Shekhinah.
Right.
Well, here, good point. Which means that if you imagine that the mezuzah is your protection, that's what's protecting you, then I think it's a problem, right? The mezuzah is simply,
They didn't think the golden calf was like.
it's a disagreement amongst the various authorities what they thought exactly. Bless you. It's not so clear what their motivation was for building the golden calf. Different opinions for different.
So I'm confused. So you are allowed to add extra things to the.
Add. You're not adding here.
allowed to
if you want to walk around with a mezuzah in your pocket because you feel that it's some kind of a protection, some kind of what's called a shmira, then you could do that because you're not adding a mitzvah over here. You're simply taking something which is used for protection, and you're going to use it for yourself as well. It's not that you're saying, huh?
Like a hamsa.
Yeah.
The evil eye.
Yeah. Again, where does the chamsa come from? You know what the chamsa is? A picture of the hand, like that, right?
Yeah, I actually have a tattoo of it.
Ah, yeah. Okay, so the interesting that the chamsa itself, where's it coming from?
Actually, my tattoo
It's
has a tattoo of it.
okay. That's complicated already. The chamsa is coming from the idea that if you put your hand in front of your face like this, then that you can't be affected by the evil eye. The evil eye can't see you. You can't see it. It's a concept. I mean, you're smiling. It reminds me. I got my father used to have in those days, no video cameras. It was a city camera. It took moving films. Right? You might remember this. I don't imagine too many other people here know what I'm talking about. But we've got footage of my brother, one up from me, who was convinced that if he couldn't see my father, then my father couldn't see him. And there's footage of him in the bath naked, going like that. So if he can't see my father, then for sure my father can't be taking his photo because, right?
This is really world mostly by Sephardic women, not.
Yeah, it has its roots. If my memory serves me correct, it has its roots in Morocco,
Yeah, right.
which is why it's very predominant amongst the Sephardi communities. The idea of having a chamsa, but it's just the idea of if you believe that the chamsa's got some kind of a protective power to it, then it's a problem, right? But if you're just using that as some kind of a symbol of the fact that we're going to be protected by God if we keep ourselves focused on God, then that's okay.
So
it's
why
fine.
is-
I mean, in general, all different kinds of scholars from different. Different
that's
scholars from different places. Sometimes they're called a shmira. Sometimes it's called a skula. But the bottom line is that it's something which is supposed to be looking after you. There was a very famous story, Rabbi Akiva Eger, who was considered he was one of the greatest scholars, certainly from the last 400 or 500 years. And he came from pure Lithuanian stock, and he looked askance upon this whole idea of what are called kameot, of omens and writing out things on parchment that are going to keep you. And what he was once a woman who was hysterical. I can't remember the details. I think she was pregnant, and she was hysterical that the pregnancy wasn't going to end healthily. And she wouldn't leave him until he'd written for her a segula. And so he took a piece of parchment and he folded it all up and he sealed it. And he told her that it was forbidden for her to open it until she went into active labor. When she went into active labor, she could then open up the piece of parchment. And if the writing had been erased, then it meant that everything was going to be okay. And that's what happened. She went into actually carried this thing around with her as a shmira to keep her healthy during the pregnancy. When she went into active labor, she then opened up the thing, and there was, lo and behold, no writing there at all. And she was so relieved that she was able to go through the labor and the delivery without it being too traumatic. And Baruch Hashem, she gave birth to a healthy child.
Isn't that still kind of idolatrous because the woman considered it?
I don't know. Let's not be too picky over here, right? It's like the gynecologist who tells all of his clients what they're going to have. So he says, Mrs. Cohen, I predict that you're going to have a baby girl, and then he writes in his little notebook, baby boy. And then when Mrs. Cohen, if she gives birth to a baby girl, then everyone says, wow, this guy's incredible. How does he know this stuff? And if she gives birth to a baby boy, she'll come and say, Dr. So-and-so, how could you have told me what you did? I had a baby boy. And he says, really? And he opens up his notebook. He says, no. He says, over here it says you can have a baby boy. What are you talking about? You must have misunderstood what I said. So anyway, that's paragraph number 1 in the Shema. Paragraph number 2 in the Shema.
I just have one other thing about the gates. Does that mean
Yeah.
does it refer to city gates or like also like fences? Like
Everything, which means like this, so not just the city gates, but let's say, for example, many people, when they come into their homes, you've got a gate that leads up into your home. If your gate has halachically, it needs something called tzurat petach, which means it's got to be a doorway,
Yeah.
Okay.
right?
Lauffer
So-
has mezuzot.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got a doorway, right? And again, a doorway, that's a pretty flexible definition, which means it could be, like somebody mentioned, an arch. It could be flat on the top. It really doesn't matter, right? You can have doorways that come to a point at the top. Even if the gate itself is not there, right? So you may have an entranceway into your building, which doesn't have a door, but you walk through an entranceway. Or you may have in your home, for example, but many people have in their homes, like an entranceway into a passageway, right into a corridor that doesn't have a door.
Right.
It's just got
But you'd still put a mezuzah.
you'd have to put a mezuzah on that because that's called tzurat petach. That's what a door frame looks like, even if it doesn't have an official door frame on it. It's been built out of plaster, or it's been built out of whatever it is.
So
Right?
if you have like just like a little low
If
fence,
you've
then
got
you
a
have
little gate, a little hedge and then a gate, then it doesn't have a mezuzah going into it. But if you've got, it's interesting. Some people put up. If you're good at gardening, you can make a. Some people like to do this. They make an archway out of hedge.
Right.
Right. So over there, it's an interesting thing. I don't know. Do you now need? Is that called tzurat petach? How do you define the doorway? Is a hedge enough?
Sounds hard to attach mezuzah to a fence.
I
do
would
it.
imagine.
Yeah, it's not permanent. It's
probably
living.
is.
This seems like it should change.
Yeah, so over here, everyone is passing that you don't need a mezuzah. Good. Good.
I don't know. I mean, like,
It's
Shush.
living.
Huh?
It's living.
Depends how green your thumbs are.
uh,
Anyway, that takes care of the first paragraph. The second paragraph is going to be the concept of ol kabbalat ol mitzvot, the accepting of the yoke of the mitzvot. Right? The first paragraph was kabbalat ol malchut shamayim, which was accepting the yoke of God's monarchy. The second one, I was going to talk about the accepting of God's mitzvot, of the commandments. That, of course, makes perfect sense because you can't really accept the commandments until you recognize that God is king, right? So once God is your king, then you can do what God wants you to do. I have a funny feeling we did it. Did we talk about the concept of a yoke?
Briefly, yeah.
The wooden thing that
Yeah.
the ox's neck.
Yeah, we did that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, anyway, let's have a look at the second. The second paragraph of the Shema is a very interesting paragraph. It's very, very different in its context. It's very different from the first paragraph. So the whole of the first part of the second paragraph of the Shema is going to talk about, about physical nature. Vaya im shamo tishmo mitzvotai, that if you listen to my mitzvahs, asher anochi mitzavacha eschem hayom, that you're commanded today, with the emphasis over here on the word hayom. It's a very, very important, very, very, very important fundamental dimension of the way that we're supposed to build up our relationship with God, is that every day needs to be its own day. Right? Which is, it's true that when we come to pray, we're saying the same thing that we said yesterday, but what we said yesterday is not what we're saying today, because we're saying it in a different way, which means that whenever you come to pray and whenever you're trying to build up your relationship with God, it needs to be done with a freshness and a newness to it, which is where the word hayom comes from, right? This idea of today. Every day is its own day. And we have to serve God with all of our hearts and with all of our souls.
What's the difference between ahava and then again b'chol levav v'chol nafshech?
Thank you. No, for a minute there, I thought no one was going to ask the question, and I was getting just a little anxious. But Baruch Hashem, Moshe. What did we say in the first paragraph? In the first paragraph of the Shema, we said, right? Sorry, where's it going? I'm sorry. Right? We went through that yesterday. We discussed the whole ideas over there. And then all of a sudden it says over here, right? That it says, La'avas Hashem Elokeichem, u'la'avdei b'chol levavchem u'v'chol nafshechem. So there are two very basic questions which need to be asked over here. The first one is, what's happened to the Mo'idecha? It should say Mo'idchem, right? Mo'idchem seems to have dropped by the way over here. Secondly, in the first paragraph, it's in the singular. Here, you should have latched onto this. In the first paragraph, it's a singular. In the second paragraph, it's in the plural. Which means, what's happened? Why are we moving from singular into plural, and what's happened to the word Mo'idecha? Right? Mo'idecha means with all of your resources.
Okay, so
The plural doesn't translate in English, though. It's too bad.
well, in the second paragraph, it's
Y'all's resources.
It's-
Y'all's.
in the second paragraph. I think it's talking about not only in this world physically do you have to serve God with all your resources, but also spiritually.
So you have all
But the problem is that in the second paragraph doesn't use the word resources at all. It just says you should serve God with all of your heart and all of your soul,
Right, but I mean,
or all of your hearts and all of your
does,
souls.
does it really need whenever it's saying with all your heart and all your soul?
Or is it the first paragraph is referring to you as an individual, and the second paragraph is
Uh-huh,
referring to Israel as a people?
So what's happened? What's the difference?
Resource-based.
Hold on a second. If what you're saying is correct, right? But if what you're saying is correct, why does the word Mo'idecha not exist now? What's happened to the resources? So you're saying that the resources for sure are there, right? In fact, if anything, when you start going into communal, you've got more resources inside of a communal gathering than you do with an individual, right? So where's it gone? So there's a very fundamental, here, it fits in very nicely. The other day was Lag BaOmer, right? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was, the Gemara describes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai as being somebody of malachtoi nasis al yedei acherim, that every things that he needed physically were done for him. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was so completely and absolutely immersed in the world of ruchnius, of spirituality, that he had no connection whatsoever to the physical world. And that's why it says that when he was in the cave, what happened in the cave over there? That God supplied him with a carob tree and with water in order to be able to subsist over there. I mean, there was no McDonald's over there, and there was no Diet Coke. There was just carobs and water, which is the minimum requirements for a person to live physically in the physical world.
But that makes sense. Where it makes sense, like when you're serving God with your resources, that's like giving tzedakah and stuff. Like you're helping other people, but like
you know what? It's not really just tzedakah. It means it's everything. It means that a person's got to be prepared to give up everything that he owns in order to serve God.
But if you're referring to like the people of Israel, like our resources are just for like ourselves, opposed to like God gives us our resources. We don't have to give our resources to Him.
I don't know. The Gemara says something else, which is it's a fascinating idea. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, malachtoi nasis al yedei acherim, he didn't bother with the physical world at all. Says the Gemara, a lot of people try to do what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did, but none of them succeeded. You've got to be on an incredibly high level to be able to do something like that. So explain like this. When it's talking in the first paragraph, it's talking about the very, very special individuals, the unique individuals inside of the Jewish people, where it says that the people who are prepared to give up everything, all of their resources, in order to serve God, are the individuals. That's why it's written in the singular. For the rest of everybody else, though, so we can deal with serving God, b'chol levavchem u'v'chol nafshechem, but the idea of everybody being able to give up, b'chol moedechem, we mentioned yesterday that the most difficult dimension is for somebody to give up everything he's got, which means to go out in a blaze of glory, to die what's called al kiddush Hashem, in sanctifying God's name. That's something that everybody can do. But to live in such a way, that's something which is a lot more difficult to do.
Does that mean that he, Ichai, was the resource, not anything? He was the resource to Hashem. Is that...
You know what? Yeah, in a certain way, which means that he's bringing the Torah into the world. He's certainly bringing, the esoteric dimension of the Torah. It's not. Listen, you have to understand. It's not by chance that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the one who introduces the concept of the esoteric dimensions, the Zohar and the Kabbalah, because those are things which are, the more detached you are from the physical world, the greater is your ability to be able to tap into the spiritual realms. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in that cave that he's there for all those years, right, is detached almost entirely from the physical, and that's why he's able to bring the esoteric dimensions of Torah into the world, which is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself is the resource, right? And that's why when it says "Uv'chol ma'odecha" in the singular, it's talking about the individuals who are truly very special. The second paragraph of the Shema, as we'll see in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow, is talking about everyone else, right? So that's why it's written in the plural. It's talking about "Uv'chol levavechem," "Uv'chol nafshechem," but the concept of "Uv'chol ma'odechem," it's not applicable. For most people, it's not applicable. That's something which is beyond our ability to be able to tap into. Good. Okay, we're going to stop over here.